I'd like to welcome you to the Shoreview Library, one of the branches of the Ramsey County Library System. This evening we have a special presentation by author Lee Burtman. She's going to tell us about her book, Lee Burtman.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you'll be able to hear me. I have sort of a soft voice, so is it okay so far? Can you hear me? All right. I'll try to make it loud enough. Well, I too want to thank Jackie Krebsbach, who was very kind in helping me promote the book and allowed me to come here tonight, as well as the Shoreview Historical Society and its board members, the Shoreview Library for hosting this, of course, and all of you for coming. I really appreciate your taking the time to be here. So again, my name is Lee Burtman. I live just north of here in Lino Lakes with my husband of almost 40 years. We have 4 grown children, and we have 5 grandchildren and a new one due in April. So I'm a busy grandma because I help take care of them, and it's a real joy to be able to do that. I just retired a couple years ago as a teacher. I'd been a teacher in the Roseville district for 34 years. And then I still work very part-time at my church as a disability ministry coordinator. We have one son who lives at home with us who has disability, and so my heart is there working with him and with other families with kids with disability. So now they say that if you're a good speaker, that you will begin your speech with a really good joke. Have you heard that before? The only problem is I'm a terrible, terrible joke teller. I'm not good at all. But my buddy Ken Krueger, who is our tonight's subject, was a really funny guy. And after enjoying a big meal, Ken would pat his belly and he'd say, "Yep, I'm on the Army diet. Everything I eat goes right to the front." That's right. And then I asked my husband is really, really, really good. And as a grandma, so I went to him and I said, "Do you have any good jokes for me?" And so as a grandma, I have a set of twins who are 4 years old, a little boy and girl, Emily and Will, and they are beautiful and a delight. But he gave me this wonderful story, which I loved, and I will read it because that's the only way I can tell a joke. It says, a woman had twins and placed them for adoption. One of them went to a family in Egypt and was named Amal. The other went to a family in Spain, and they named him Juan. Years later, Juan sent a picture of himself to his birth mom. Upon receiving the picture, she told her husband that she wished she also had a picture of Amal. But her husband responded, "But dear, they are twins. If you've seen Juan, you've seen Amal." I thought that was cute. Yeah, okay, I'll tell my husband you like that. Anyway. So anyway, 11 years ago, I had the joy of meeting then 80-year-old World War II veteran Ken Krueger. And thanks to him, I began sort of a third career, if you will. As a teacher, I had written a lot of articles and information for parents and things, but I had never really written a book. So that was something that it was in my heart to do. And one day at our church, it was Memorial Day of 2005, we always honor our veterans. We ask them to stand and we give them applause and we thank them for their service. But this one service, Ken really caught my eye. The other vets were standing tall and proud as we honored and thanked them, but Ken sat there, or stood there, I should say, with his head bowed and holding on to the pew in front of him, sobbing audibly. And I was just very, very touched just by that raw emotion that he had. And I thought, wow, what kind of memories does he have that must be so vivid 60 years or more after the war had ended? And so I assumed that most of the memories that he had, eliciting those tears, had to do with the horrors of war. But then I found out it was that and much more, which I will share with you tonight. I didn't know him very well, but I was just moved to approach him and to ask him if he would share his memories. And I was very surprised that he would. A lot of our veterans do not care to share their memories. I have my own Uncle Bill, who was a veteran of the Pacific Theater during World War II, and I would love to get his story. But he says, you know what, I've spent an entire lifetime trying to forget. Why would I want to talk about it? So I certainly respect that, but I was very glad that Ken could do that, and he agreed to talk to me, and so week by week he would tell me more and more about his story. And it was just so fascinating. It was a wonderful story, and I said, this has to be a book. You can't make this up. And so I asked him if he would trust me, a novice writer, to help him write it. And he was amazed that I asked him to do that, because he had been hoping for years that somebody would help him do that. And so our journey together began. So I began to interview Ken, and I just asked him to write down everything he could remember about the war. And again, he hadn't even thought about it his whole life. He hadn't thought about it since he got back. But he sat down and he had a memory. It was just amazing. And he wrote 90 pages of notes, just cataloging everything that he could think about. And so I took those notes and I studied a lot of World War II history to be able to relate it to his story, and found photographs and things like that. And so we published our first book. We titled it Fighting for Delphine, A Soldier's True Story of Triumph and Tears, there goes tears again, in 2008. So this was our very first book, kind of talking about his experiences. And we've had the joy of discussing his story at many, many venues. There's probably been hundreds of them at venues like this, at World War II events, book clubs, all sorts of places. We had a lot of fun doing that. And so Ken loved to tell his story and to talk with other veterans and their families at the different venues. We've been on television and radio, and we just really had a great time with it. It kind of gave him a new lease on life. He used to just sit around and watch TV a lot, and now he's kind of like a little rock star. So it was kind of great for him and myself too. It was a real joy. Anyway, so we worked on this, and we're out promoting this book until last year. In March of 2015, he'd been very healthy, but he started to develop some heart and lung issues. And he became ill and was in the hospital for a while. And even though in the hospital at one point he was in the ER and he was very, very sick, and we were there waiting. We didn't know if he was going to make it, to be honest. And it was a very difficult time, but he was very weak, but he still started talking to the doctors and nurses about his book and about his story, and he sold several copies. So he's lying on the gurney, almost not with us, and he actually sold a few. So anyway, his last signing was in June of 2015, and that is when he died suddenly at the age of 90. So I was just so incredibly blessed to know him, and he became a very dear friend of mine and kind of like a second dad, and really missed the guy, that's for sure. He was buried at Fort Snelling, which ironically was the same place that he was inducted into the Army, at Fort Snelling, and again, he's deeply missed. But he wanted me to continue telling his story. I think we need to preserve these stories. We know that our veterans are dying 1 every 3 minutes across this nation, and we want to capture these stories before they take them with them, if you will. So I feel really called to preserve these stories and to be able to tell them to others. So I do have a few slides here, and I'm going to be reading some excerpts from the book as well. And I should say that I will be reading out of, I don't know if I have that on here, the new version of the book. This is what we're promoting now. This has been sold out, and so I took this book and added another 10 chapters and just republished this. So this is the second edition of the book. So that's what I'll be referring to today. So who was Ken? I'm going to see if I can do this. I'm not really good at technology, but here he is. And this was in 2008, again, when we published the first book. He lived in Blaine, Minnesota with his adult son, Paul. He had 4 other children, 10 grandchildren, and 16 great-grandchildren. And Ken was a retired truck driver and also a daycare volunteer. He worked at his church as a volunteer with the children until he was 89 years old. And he loved working with those children. That was a real joy for him. Now, Ken wasn't your traditional hero. He wasn't like an Audie Murphy. Maybe some of you are familiar. He was the most highly decorated veteran in the United States. But Ken is still a hero to me, and he did win some medals we'll talk about later as well. But all of them are heroes to me in that they sacrificed their time, they sacrificed their families, their education, their careers, and of course their limbs. We'll talk about that later too, and even their lives for our safety and for our freedom. So I like to talk about the kind of the everyday soldiers, the everyday people who did extraordinary things for us. As you know, Veterans Day is Friday, and so we want to honor all our veterans for sure on Friday, but it's good to talk about it any day. And so tonight I'm going to talk about some of the highlights of the war and also a beautiful love story. And of course there's a lot more detail in the book, so if you're interested, I have some books available afterward, but I'll just kind of get you started and kind of give you a little taste of his story. Let's see, Ken was born, well, I'm going to start reading actually this little excerpt here. It says, "My story begins and ends humbly enough. I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota on October 13th, 1924, and named Kenneth Alden Krueger. Yes, that would be Friday the 13th. After I was delivered, the doctor came to the waiting room holding a bundle of blue and proudly handed it over to my dad. You can imagine the look on his face when Dad pulled back the blanket and stared into the face of a black baby. I guess it's nice to have a doc with a good sense of humor. That was Friday the 13th. Anyway, thankfully my dad had a good sense of humor too, so they shared a hearty laugh before I made my true appearance as a bouncing blue-eyed blonde. So that was how it started. And of course he talks more in the book about the Depression and what his family went through during the time. But you know, he was really happy. It was a difficult time because they had nothing, but he was very poor but happy. Then, of course, when he grew up, he again talks about some of his early childhood experiences, but then Pearl Harbor was attacked. And here he was at the age of 19. This is a couple years later. At about 17, he was age 17 when Pearl Harbor was attacked. On December 7th, 1941, my dad came home from Gill's Bar, his usual watering hole, and announced the Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and in his voice and said, "Ken, they're going to take you." He meant, of course, Uncle Sam. I'm not sure what shocked me more, news of the attack or my dad's emotional statement. You see, I never felt he cared that much about me. For years, up until we could defend ourselves, my dad would beat me and my brothers every day. He'd come home drunk and angry and beat my mom a while, then get us boys. I got the brunt of it, being the oldest and the biggest kid. So it was kind of a nice surprise to see those tears and to know that he really did love me. So at age 17, Ken and his buddies left school. They went down and volunteered. Again, he was inducted at Fort Snelling, and he got some descriptions of what happened there. It's pretty amusing. And again, he had never been outside of Minneapolis, literally. He had never stepped foot out of Minneapolis his whole life. But before he knew it, he was on a troop ship going across sub-infested waters to the bloody battlefields of Europe. Now before that, of course, Ken had to be trained, so he went to Camp Crowder, Missouri. And they called it Misery instead of Missouri. You heard that? And it was summer and it was very, very hot. So anyway, so he went there and they had him go to mechanic school. And that was because he, at home, before that, he was training pigeons. He was doing homing pigeons. And so he thought that, or the Army thought that he would tie in nicely with the Signal Corps. And so he was trained for the Signal Corps and was supposed to be, his job eventually would be to deliver messages in Europe, but he didn't know how to drive. He flunked all the driver training because they were too poor to own a vehicle, and he never drove before. So it took a long time for him to learn, but he did. And he ended up, during the war, putting about 100,000 miles on his vehicle. So he learned the hard way. Then he went to Louisiana, Camp Polk. See, I think that's the next one. And this is Ken right here, this handsome guy right there. And he was put into the 92nd Signal Battalion, and it's called the HQ and HQ Company. And that's where he got his Jeep training. He spent quite a bit of time. I guess I forgot to put his Jeep out. I have a little miniature model of it. But that's what he did there. And then he went on to Texas, to Camp Maxey, and he took machine gun training. And we have some descriptions of that. Again, a kind of amusing time for him there too. And then he became the driver for the first lieutenant down there, and he was so excited because he got out of KP duty. So he was really happy that he didn't have to go there. Then it was time for him, after almost 2 years of training, for him to go get involved with the war. Let's see, so I'm just going to read a little bit. It says, "We joined a convoy of nearly 36 ships, a battleship, aircraft carriers, destroyers, tankers, and troop ships. Our first challenge, to safely cross Torpedo Alley. This area of the Atlantic stretched from near Newfoundland in the north to the outer banks of North Carolina in the south. Wolf packs, or death squads of 15 to 20 German submarines, prowled those waters. Their objective was to take down merchant ships loaded with supplies, food, oil, and sadly, civilians. And they were very good at it. From January until July of 1942 alone, German U-boats sank 397 ships, killing over 5,000 people. They proudly called it Happy Time, or the, quote, Great American Turkey Shoot. Of course, destroying troop ships was an even greater prize to the enemy. We heard of ships carrying soldiers which had been sunk in Torpedo Alley before our convoy passed through, and wondered quietly to ourselves whether we would be the next turkeys. So Ken, then at that point, he went over across the ocean. He was in Ireland and Scotland and England. And then he was assigned to the 15th Corps of Patton's Third Army. And he actually saw General Patton twice, once in Ireland and once in England, and everything that was what they said about him was true. He had a very foul mouth, and they would blare these things over the loudspeaker, and all the people in the town could hear that. But anyway, obviously he pretty much won the war for us. So his methods worked, I guess. And then about a month after D-Day, then Ken went into France. Our destination, Bloody Omaha, one of the principal landing points on the beaches of Normandy. This area, about 3.5 miles long, ran from Saint-Honorine-des-Pertes to Vieux-sur-Mer. Though its military code name was Omaha Beach, the nickname described its reputation as a killing field, where over 3,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing by the time evening fell on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Despite the horrific losses, 34,000 soldiers did land safely. Then through sheer guts and determination, they managed to climb the bluffs, organize themselves into small groups that spread across the plateau, attack the enemy from the rear, and declare victory. Though the beach was strewn with the burning vehicles and bodies of our courageous boys, the coastal villages were in Allied hands by nightfall. By July 1st, the beachhead would be secure up to 70 miles along the coast and would welcome 1 million Allied troops and nearly 200,000 vehicles. As we approached 1 month later, we were more than ready to begin our work in France. When Ken was in the Normandy area, one thing was really evident. He really had a heart for kids. And while he was there was a young lady, and she was only she looks older, but she was only about maybe 11 or 12 years old. Her name was Yvette. Her father was a POW, and she was going around to the soldiers selling beans. She had nothing. The people were starving then, but she had some green beans, and so she would go around to the different soldiers and sell the beans to them. And so he really befriended her while he was there for several months in that area. And so he bought her shoes and he bought her clothing. He'd send away to America to his mom, who was here, of course, in Minneapolis, and she would send little bundles of items and the things that she couldn't wear. He didn't know the sizes, and she didn't know the sizes, but they would send those and share them with the other children in the village. So, and we found out, we're still trying to contact her. We found out that she's still alive, and a little later I'll tell you, when I went back to France, we tried to find her, and we're still trying to, but we understand that she lives in a nursing home outside of Paris now. So haven't made contact yet, but still would love to. It would be really neat to do that. Ken also, and again, evidence of how he loved children. As I said, he worked at a daycare center for many years of his life. But as a soldier, a little later in the story, I had written a narrative for another publication, but I just wanted to share this. The boy's thin fingers fiercely gripped the metal fence. His huge eyes, brown pools hovering over hollow cheeks, gripped Ken Krueger's heart. The child was just one of dozens who often stood outside the gates of the American Army camp in Austria toward the end of World War II, desperately hungry and clamoring for a scrap of bread. This evening he was the only one. The others had given up hope and returned home to an empty pantry. Ken reached over the fence and placed his entire mess kit into the hands of the boy, who scurried away with the life-sustaining treasure. Food supplies were running low for the troops, so Ken was feeling famished himself, but he would rather endure one night of hunger, however, than to be haunted by the thought of that little one's stomach gnawing on itself all night. Ken often shared his meals with kids across Europe as he served in Patton's Third Army. The gift of an orange or a chocolate bar brought shrieks of delight from the children and a moment of joy for the young soldier. Such moments were rare in a world of destruction, death, and despair. Now again, Ken's job was that of a motor messenger, and this is just a little model of a Jeep, and it would not have said messenger on there. You did not want to advertise the fact. This is a model that his son made, but you didn't want to do that because he had top secret messages. He would have to go to the message center where Patton and the different generals would create the different messages. Often they were the orders for the troops because they would blow up all other means of communication. So all the telegraph and teletype and all those other means were destroyed, and they didn't have cell phones back then, so they had to depend on the motor messengers to hop in those Jeeps, with their messages and to get to off into the front lines. And it was very dangerous work because they had to do it in the dark of night. They couldn't go during the daytime because the enemy, of course, would see them. So he had to go in the dark of night, and they had something called a cat eye, which was a little teeny light at the front of their Jeep that would have just a little teeny ray of light, just barely, so that he could sort of keep himself on the road. But it was very dangerous because it was just pitch black. They had big things called tank traps in the road. They were 30 feet wide, and they were obviously for the tanks to go in, but a vehicle could very well go into that in the dark of night. Of course, there was a lot of strafing going on. There were a lot of German soldiers that would hide in the woods along, I don't know if you've been to France, but they had these very narrow roads, tons of trees that hug the roads, and then the snipers would be in there and would be able to pick off the soldiers as they go by. There's machine gun fire, of course, and the shells, and so it was a lot of danger there. And he really had very little sleep. He would drive again at night, try to catch some sleep in the woods, maybe throw a sleeping bag in the middle of the woods and try to sleep a little bit. But he really didn't sleep very much. He would sometimes be up just for 48 hours or more without sleeping. When he could sleep, they would find an old barn or an old building there. Again, sometimes just in the woods. So he didn't really have a bed for nearly 2 years, but eventually he would. His only break was a little bit later in Paris, the only break in 2 years. And this was 3 days after the liberation of Paris. And it was a wonderful time. Everyone was still just in the streets, just hugging and kissing all the soldiers. And they were just so happy to be liberated. And I have a picture there of Ken. I've got the original on the table there. But Ken was just going down the street with some of his buddies, and there was a photographer's studio there. And the photographer asked him to come on in and asked him if he would hold the French flag. And so he went in there, and his buddies were still outside, and he was all proud of himself. And I have, and scoot over here, I have some of the artifacts that he brought back. And this is not the same flag, but just another small French flag. So it's kind of neat to have that. I hope to get it in a special case someday, but he brought home that French flag. So he was very proud to hold that. And so he thought he was really cool. He's going out to his friends. Wow, I got my picture taken, and I'm really cool. Anyway, his buddies in the meantime were outside in the Jeep, and they were just swarmed by beautiful French women who were hugging him and kissing him and giving them gifts of wine and tomatoes. So he missed out on that. But anyway, it was a wonderful time. It was an honor to be there. He saw the sights while he was there, of course, the Eiffel Tower. This is an old depiction of it. And it's kind of interesting. There's a story in the book about a man who was the military governor of Hitler's, I should say, and his name was Choltitz. And he, at the end of the war, right when Paris was liberated, actually, he was told he had to destroy the entire city. He was supposed to destroy Paris, and part of Hitler's scorched earth policy. And so he had all the bridges over the River Seine were all rigged with explosives. So was the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, the Notre Dame, and guess what? Obviously, they're still there. Choltitz defied Hitler. He lied to him, actually. Would you lie to Hitler? I don't know. He actually lied to Hitler, and I managed to survive for a while after the war. But he lied to him and said that he had done all that, and he hadn't. So at the end, the people in France called him the savior of Paris, because he saved all the big important buildings and things. So anyway, unfortunately, many people were killed under his control as well. Anyway, after he had a couple days in Paris, then it was time to move on. And at this point, they were pushing Hitler back into Germany. And so Ken was stationed on the French-German border, the kind of easternmost part there of Germany and France. So he's right on the border in this little town called Fenetrange in the Alsace-Lorraine area. And I'm just going to read a little bit about that. Fenetrange was a picturesque village of stone cottages, a church, a few shops, including a charcuterie and a boulangerie, that's just a butcher shop and a bakery, and about 300 folks who called it home. It was framed by dense green forests spreading across gently rolling hills. Our captain scouted out some places for us to stay. He found an extra bedroom for me and a guy named Vitali in a weathered 3-bedroom house attached to an old chateau. The chateau overlooked a river in the back and was flanked by a garden, heavy with vegetables waiting to be plucked from withering vines on one side, and an animal pen, heavy with a fat pig on the other. Clumps of flowers, delphiniums I guess, were still soaking up the pale rays of October sun and decorating the lawn with their lavender blue blossoms. Bees were buzzing, working furiously to drink in the last of the sweet flower nectar to make enough honey for their brood to last the winter. And that's why I chose the delphinium, and that ties in with her name, Delphine, delphinium, the flowers, just an aside. But I just love that description of those beautiful delphinium blue eyes. At that point, the war was stalled. This was getting right toward the end. It was the fall of '44, and they were running out of fuel. And so the war was kind of stalled at that point. And so Ken, beginning in October of '44, was told to stay in that vicinity. And it was essential that they had some place to stay at this point. And they ended up having the bitterest winter that they'd had in many, many years. It was just bitterly cold, and many citizens and soldiers succumbed to the cold and the snow that very year. It was really, really bad. So we're thankful that Ken had a place to stay. And again, it was, their word chateau means castle. It wasn't a castle, but it was from like the 11th century. It was quite old. But it's on a little river called the Sar River, and that's an actual photograph of it from the 40s. And Ken was really excited because it had a bed. This was the first time in 2 years that he had a bed to sleep in, and so he was just so excited to have that bed. But better than that, there was a girl who lived in the house too. All too soon the captain announced it was time to go downstairs to meet our new French hosts. Reluctantly, I rose and followed him and Vitaly, feeling that I could have slept in that bed for a month without waking up. But what awaited me at the bottom of the stairs would prove to be better than 1,000,000 wonderful nights of rest. Our eyes met instantly, the second I entered the hallway. I hazily remember shaking hands with a large man and his petite wife as introductions were made, but my gaze never left the lavender blue eyes of his young daughter, Delphine. I couldn't help noticing that those eyes were as bright a blue as those flowers outside. Suddenly, she was heartily shaking my hand and flashing a bright smile toward me. Thick waves of dark brown hair framed her delicate face and fell on slim shoulders. I sensed her hand in mine. Hers felt small and cool, while mine was hot, rough, damp, and probably not too clean. She didn't seem to mind, though, and held my hand for what seemed like a blissfully long time. So that was the beginning of their relationship. And again, Ken had some time on his hands, but he would go off to the war, and when he was called to do a particular drive or run with the correspondence, and then he would come back to her and spend some time. One thing they used to do, this is the only picture we have of her, is on a duck boat right in that river behind the chateau is a little duck boat, they called it. It's sort of like a mixture of a canoe and a kayak, I think. But they used to have a really good time on the river there, and sometimes they would ride bikes through the Fenetrange forest, and I've been there, and it's amazingly beautiful. It's just lovely there. And Ken just couldn't wait to come back to her. He'd again go off to war, and he'd come back and ring a little bell on her house and spend more time. So anyway, they did this for 4 months. They go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then finally Ken took the next step. It was getting dark as I rang the little bell mounted on the wooden door of the courtyard. My heart was pounding wildly as I waited for what seemed hours for someone to answer. She just had to be there. I had only that one night to see her. But what if she wasn't there? Maybe she was really upset at my leaving and had run away. Or maybe she'd forgotten me already and was out on the town with some other guy. Maybe she was sick or had been hurt, or, to my great relief, the large door swung open and there she stood, bewildered but with that bright smile on her face. Calling me Kenny, her special nickname, Delphine fell into my arms and exclaimed that she thought she'd never see me again. After opening the door to let me park the Jeep inside the yard, she and I held hands tightly while strolling into the house. As soon as we'd stepped into the hallway, I pulled her toward me and allowed all the feelings I'd held inside for months to tumble out. Here she stood before me, hopeful, pure, alive, in stunning contrast to the fear, the filth, the death of the world around us. Overwhelmed by my feelings of love and gratitude for her, I told Delphine how much I loved her and that I wanted her to be my wife. Once again, tears trickled down her face and she said, "Oui, mon chou," over and over again. This time they were tears of joy, both hers and mine. Does anyone know what mon chou means? Literally, it means my little cabbage. But anyway, she said, "Oh, bonjour, mon chou," means hi, my little cabbage. So anyway, so they were engaged to be married. But guess what? Back to war. It was time for Ken to go back to the war. And not too far from the village where she was, he went across to across the German border into France just a little bit to a place called Dachau, concentration camp. We moved into some old German barracks in the small, quiet town of Dachau on our way to Munich, located 18 miles south. Everyone was talking about the prison at the edge of town. A few days earlier, on April 29, 1945, it had been liberated by the U.S. 7th Army. The unspeakable horrors discovered there would stun the world and sear into the minds of all who entered its black iron gates not only what we were fighting for, but what we were fighting against, as expressed by General Eisenhower himself. I'm not going to go on with that. That was a really difficult chapter to write. Ken shared some things with me that, to be honest, I couldn't even put into words. But I did the best I could, and I'll let you read that for yourselves, but it's quite heartrending. Ken called it the Nazi version of hell, and he saw the evidence of that firsthand, of the unspeakably evil acts against innocent women, children, and kids. And so for anyone who tries to deny that the Holocaust occurred, you could have talked to someone like Ken, because he would tell you what the truth was. Well, after that, Ken went back to Fenetrange, and by the time he got there, he was very sick and he nearly died. I don't even know to this day what he had, and he doesn't know either. But there weren't any doctors, because guess what? They had been captured. Hitler was desperate for people and workers, so he would come into France, and that area was disputed. We talk in the book about the history there. It was French and then German and French and German, but Hitler felt that he could just come on in and take whoever he could, so he'd taken all the doctors and the nurses away to work for the Reich. And so then Delphine and her mom had to nurse Ken back. And guess what they had to use? They really had no medicine or anything. Do you know what they used? Peppermint schnapps. and Ken was a teetotaler. He didn't touch alcohol. He was so out of it, he didn't know. And so they gave him that, and it worked wonders. So if you're ever sick, you could try a little schnapps, see how that works. But he recovered, and at that time, then they started to plan their wedding. And so there's a description in there about how they planned the wedding. It's kind of a charming story about the French wedding, and some of the traditions that we see here began in France, and so I won't go over all that, but it's kind of fun. Anyway, but at the end of this time, he got better, and then he had to get a pass and go back, because he was AWOL at that point, not intentionally. But he warned them, and he said, "We have the wedding planned, but don't plan on a certain date," because I don't know if I can get a pass. I have to get a pass from my commander, and I'm not sure I can get a pass. So whatever you do, don't plan a specific day. I might be here a month from now on the Saturday, but don't plan on it. Wait till you hear from me. And guess what? No pass. He didn't get the pass, and he went to all the different people higher ups and was not able to secure the pass. But there was no way to tell her that. They didn't have cell phones. And there was no way to, ironically, he was a motor messenger, and he couldn't deliver that message to her that he couldn't be there. So anyway, about 2 weeks later, he finally did, and this is actually the actual pass and his dog tags there, but he finally got the pass, and he felt assured that she would understand, and so he hopped on a train, and he ran to her house, and he ran and rang the little bell, and that's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you what happens after that. You have to read the story, because it doesn't, Jackie, it really spoils it if you know too much. So anyway. So the next picture is Ken when he got home. Then here he is, fast forward the story. And he was home after 2 years overseas and 3 years altogether in the Army, of course, including his training, a little more than that. And then I met Ken in 2005, so keep in mind this is an old picture. I look less wrinkly, but anyway, I've had more grandkids and stuff since then. But anyway, we met in 2005, and again I wrote the book. And at the end of this book, we just talked about how he dreamt of returning. That was just the dream, but he didn't have any money. We didn't have any money. We thought, oh, there's just no way we can do this. His health was starting to decline a little bit in that he couldn't walk well. He had arthritis in his legs, and he was in constant pain. He never complained, but he was in chronic pain most of the time, and so that was difficult. We just thought, there's no way. But you know what? One day I just said, we have to get him back. We just have to. So I talked to my dear husband, and we took a mortgage out on our house. And, we popped him in a wheelchair, and we got him back to France after 67 years at the age of 86. So again, after the trip, I wrote part 2 of the book and added those chapters, and we call the second half Return to Fenetrange. It contains, again, the first book, but also the second part. And then we have actual photographs, too. We included some of the photos of what happened when we took him back. So, and I have some more photographs. If you'd like, in the red book up here at the table, you can take a peek at that if you'd like to see some of our other photographs going back. But it was amazing, amazing trip. And I am so thankful I did it before it was too late. Had we waited even another year, I don't think he could have made it. He just was getting more weak, and I just don't think he would have been able to enjoy the trip at all. So we took him back to Paris again. We flew him over and got him back to Paris, to the Eiffel Tower. Before, when he was there during the war, he'd only seen the bottom of the tower. He had never been in it, so we took him up in the tower, and he was just so thrilled. And it was kind of fun, and you can look out in every direction. You can look out for miles and miles and miles, but it was really fun because we had this, you can see this cap here. I have the original hat, this World War II vet's hat. We've got a Korean War hat there too, but World War II hat, and this was like his magic hat, we called it, because everybody that saw this instantly just recognized, who he was, and gave him a lot of attention and a lot of honor, and so it was really fun. So while we were waiting to get into the Eiffel Tower, the line was just hours long. I can't even believe how long it was, and we were waiting in the wheelchair, thinking, okay, we'll go get our tickets, and you have to go wait in line forever. And if a French gendarme or police officer saw us, he came over and he escorted us up to the front, got us tickets, escorted us the back way up into the tower, so we got to get right in. So it was really nice. So this was a really wonderful thing, and we used, unwittingly, we were able to see a lot of things because of this, and have a few little favors. So it was great, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. Anyway, so I'm going to go back here. So we went, first of all, again, to the Eiffel Tower, and then we went to the Arc de Triomphe. Of course, that is the big tower that celebrates the French military victories. And that was kind of funny too, because we were going to go see it. It's just beautiful, as all this carved artwork and wonderful things, it was for Napoleon, and it was just fascinating. But Ken needed to use the restroom, and he couldn't wait very long, and so we were looking for a restroom. I speak a little French, and so I was trying to find somebody around there, and this gentleman, I asked where the bathroom was, and so we grabbed Ken, and he said, this way, you see. So we followed this guy all this way, and then we come up into this big platform, and there were thousands of people there. It was a huge ceremony that they have honoring the unknown soldier and all their military and some other people. So we couldn't believe it. We were like, oh my. And so they assumed that we were part of that group. And so they take Ken over, and they put him in the line of all these dignitaries and things. And we're just like, no, we're just looking for the bathroom. And so Ken was they thought he was a big celebrity. So it was kind of funny. So there he got to meet a 5-star general. His name is General Couche. And Ken was very honored. It was just so cute, because the general just looked at him and he said, "You're an American." He spoke a little English, and he said, "You're an American. What are you doing here?" So it was great, because it was really to honor the French soldiers. So it was kind of fun. But anyway, there's more details in the book, again, about just some of these funny incidents. And then this is their Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. They have the eternal flame, just as we do. And so we were there, and they had a band playing, and they had flowers and all this stuff going on. It was really fun. So he was an honored guest there, unwittingly, and that was a fun time. And everywhere we went with Ken and his hat, he was just mobbed constantly. People would come, and they recognized who he was, and they would hug him and kiss him and want his autograph and take a photo with him. And they told us wonderful stories. They said, because of you guys, you men and women who came here, I'm alive today because you saved my father, you saved my grandfather. And so many people told us that. Young people really appreciated it. And it's weird, because when we were in the American airports and things, not one person said hello to Ken. Not one in our own country. It was kind of sad. But in France, they haven't forgotten. They have not forgotten our soldiers, and that meant a lot to Ken. And we appreciated that very much. Then after Paris, we moved on to Fenetrange, and this is another photo. And the thing about France that we loved, I don't know if you've been there, but they don't tear things down. Everything is kind of the same. So all the things he had told me about, I got to go see them with my own eyes, and it was just wonderful. And this was the little Sarre River where he went down with the boat. And then this is the castle here. It has been renovated. They didn't tear it down, but they renovated it now, and it's going to be, at that point, it was going to be shops and restaurants and things like that. But at least it was being used, and so that was kind of neat. We went and found the train station. This is the Fenetrange train station, and they even had the rails that said 1945 on there. It was not being used, of course. We could see the weeds there, but it said 1945 along there, so that's when those tracks were put in. And the book talks a lot about the train station. It was an important place for Ken because he kept coming back and forth to be with her. And we were going down to visit it so that we could take some shots, and the woman we were staying with said, "Oh, be careful, be careful. There are gypsies that live in that building now, and they will eat you." So there were all these rumors that they were eating people. I don't think it was true. We went down and we asked permission to take their photos, and they were very nice. So that was kind of funny. And then we moved on to meet the mayor of Fenetrange, who is this lovely lady toward the bottom, and her name was Madame Orvath, and she was the mayor. And Ken was just so excited, and she came up, and the French, they're very affectionate, and she came up and gave him a kiss on both cheeks, and he just laughed, and he goes, "That's the first time I've ever been kissed by a mayor." So anyway, he got a kick out of that. So, and they just couldn't have been nicer. They had this whole ceremony for him, and they had refreshments, and they gave him beautiful gifts from the city, just all sorts of beautiful memorabilia that he has to this day, or had, and that was a really fun time. And then we actually got to go and find the house where he stayed. The house is still there, where he stayed with Delphine and her family. And another family, obviously, was renting the property right there. But let's see if I have a picture of, I guess I didn't. He actually found the bedroom where he stayed and things. We couldn't go in all the way. They let us come into the living room a little bit. So that was fun for him to have some memories of that. But he got to sit in this old bench outside, and he used to sit there and neck with her, and so it was just deja vu. It was pretty neat. And the river again is still there. There's a beautiful park across there, so we enjoyed that. He even found his old headquarters. This is the 15th Corps Army headquarters at the edge of town, where he would deliver and retrieve his messages. So he'd go, that was like the message center at that point. So he'd go get his messages, and then he would go off to do his work. But the building again is still there, and so we explored it. It's abandoned, but again, they don't tear things down, so that was kind of neat. We also ran into this. Ken spent a lot of time delivering messages to the 2nd French Armored Division, and they have this tank here, and he was very excited to see that because again, he saw that tank quite a bit during the war. And we're not sure. We tried to check into the history of it, but what happened is Ken was at the breakthrough at Avranches, which is kind of south of the Normandy beaches, and so there was a really important time when they broke through the German defenses at Avranches, and then that's when they made their break through into Paris to liberate Paris. So anyway, a lot of these tanks came through that path, and then Ken was delivering messages to them, and then some of those tanks went on into Germany when they pushed Hitler all the way back into Germany. So it's kind of neat for Ken to see that. We went ahead to another little town called Saint-Marie-du-Mont, and this is the first town that was liberated by sea. There's some towns were liberated by air, and some were liberated by sea, and some on land. And so we went, and it was on D-Day, and so we went, and they had a whole camp set up, and it was wonderful because here Ken could meet all these soldiers that were portraying him. And this gentleman here with the tummy, he had the front thing too, didn't he? Anyway, he was he's a Frenchman, portraying Ken, the Signal Corps operator. So that was kind of funny. And he let him hold his Thompson sub. Ken was issued a Thompson submarine gun, but you know what? He only used it for training. He never used it the whole of the war. He never used it. But it was fun for him to have that and kind of take a look at that. So that was really fun to meet the reenactor there, and they really enjoyed him too. And then we went to a place called La Fière, and it was a really key bridge in that area as well, and this important battle had taken place there. It was an important bridge for us to get our men and supplies and things over so we could continue the fight east. But anyway, so a lot of things happened there, and there were a lot of airborne soldiers. And at the time we went, they were doing a ceremony for the 82nd Airborne gentlemen, and so they were just, again, tons of people crowding around him and thanking him and for his service. So it's kind of neat to meet the current soldiers and then one of our old soldiers as well. But Ken knew, you know, he was very much honored wherever we went, but he knew that he was just one of the 16 million American men and women that had gone over there, and he just represented them. Another fun thing he got to do was go into that Jeep again. Here was one of the Jeeps, and what they do in France is that these reenactors, they just meticulously refurbish all the tanks and the Jeeps and everything. So when you go there, you're like transported back to another era. It was just amazing. And so he got a ride with another beautiful French woman. He had an eye for the ladies, and so he had a good time with the young woman there who gave him a ride. So that was a real thrill. It was hard to get him in and out of it, but we did. It was kind of challenging. And then we went back to Omaha Beach, and I'm going to read a little description of that for you as well. We came to a road that cut through the bluff and went down to the beach with golden sand, appropriately named La Plage de Sable d'Or, better known as codename Omaha. Ken could not wait to get out of the car and step once again on the strand where he had begun the journey of a lifetime. As he struggled to pull himself out of the vehicle, the scorching pain in his legs returned. It was nearly forgotten in anticipation of that moment, however. He steadied his wobbly limbs and began to walk across the kelp rack and to the smooth, unblemished sand beyond the high tide line. There were a few people walking silently, reverently along the coast. Lost in their own thoughts, they took no notice of Ken. This was no place for conversation or frolicking in the surf or picnicking on the beach. It was a killing field. Ken stopped to catch his breath and realized how peaceful it was there. The rhythmic rolling of the waves was somehow soothing and had long ago washed the sand clean of the blood spilled by 2,000 young men. It was hard now to envision the hellish reality that had greeted our advancing troops, the chaos, smoke, explosions, red-stained water and limp bodies floating toward shore. How could such terror have existed where such tranquility now reigns? He looked to the tall ridge behind him and wondered what it had been like for the soldiers attempting to scale it. Gazing beyond the ridge, he smiled at what he had seen on his first day in Normandy back in July of 1944, the red, white, and blue of the American flag thrashing in the wind. The very colors are a testament to soldiers like Ken, who served, and to those who continue to serve our country today. Red signifies valor and the willingness to sacrifice. Blue stands for vigilance and justice. White represents pure intentions and high ideals. The ideal of securing God-given freedom for all people spurred those men to slog through icy, choppy water, to crawl across 300 yards of open beach littered with barbed wire, mines, beach obstacles, and the bloodied corpses of their buddies, and to claw their way up 100-foot-tall hills under the rain of Nazi machine gun, artillery, and mortar fire at the rate of 100,000 rounds per minute. Ken paused to say a brief prayer of praise to God for those intrepid heroes all along the Normandy coast and across Europe who had reclaimed liberty with their very lives. He thought of a quote he once heard by Thomas Campbell, quote, "The patriot's blood is the seed of freedom's tree," unquote. So Ken just took a moment to pray, and it really was a striking contrast because of all the things, if you've ever watched the movies or the actual footage and things, it's just terrific, but it's just quiet and beautiful and stark contrast to what happened nearly 70 years ago. And then we were at the American Cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer, and that's the one at Omaha Beach, and they had the crosses there, and because it was D-Day, they had often the French and the American flags flying there, or positioned there, I should say, amongst the crosses and the Stars of David. It was really interesting, though, because in all the little towns you went to, not so much Paris, but in all the little towns you went to, they have a town square, and in that town square is the French flag and the American flag flying side by side. I was so touched by that. I didn't realize that they honored our flag as well as their own. And it wasn't just for D-Day, it was every day. So that was a neat thing. One of the most touching moments in the second part of the book for me was when we met some Iraqi war vets. There we heard this program going on. We were finishing up visiting the cemetery is immense. It's beautiful, and it's just a wonderful tribute to our troops. But there was a ceremony going on, and once again they included Ken. Wittingly, we didn't even know, and here they ended up including him. And you probably can't tell, but these gentlemen were on this big battlefield bike ride, and they were going from up from the Normandy beaches, riding bikes all the way to Paris. But they weren't riding bikes with their legs as normal. They were using their arms, and most of these were Iraqi and Afghanistan vets who had lost limbs during the war. And so it was very touching, and they were there. You can't tell, but a lot of them were missing one or both legs and had prostheses, of course. But they would pedal these bikes all that way. I can't imagine. It was quite neat. It was quite an honor to meet these vets. And this was just a really wonderful moment. There was an MC there, and he recognized Ken in the midst and started to honor him. And when these guys were the ones that were officially supposed to be honored. Our flag, billowing gently in the salty breeze, was slowly lowered and gathered together. The bagpipes started up again as soon as Old Glory was down, but its strains quickly faded as the piper left the square and slowly made his way toward the sea. The group began to carefully fold the flag lengthwise 3 times directly in front of Ken. Then one of the 4 young men who had greeted Ken stepped forward and solemnly began to create a neat triangle, folding the cloth hand over hand. As Ken was watching him work, he noticed there was something different about all 4 of the men. Each of them was missing one or both legs. The young man firmly tucked in the final corner of the flag and handed it to the Master of Ceremonies. He clutched it to his chest and then was expected to hand it back to the 4 men who had been designated as the honored recipients. But instead, the MC spun around, marched forward, and extending his arms, offered it to the astounded Minnesota veteran. Ken's heart began to throb as he sensed an enormous proverbial lump rising in his throat. With trembling hands, he reached up to receive it, the precious symbol of his nation for which untold millions had given their lives. The sheer heft of the flag was felt in his arms. The sheer weight of this moment was felt in his heart. Ken gave a salute with tears slipping down his cheeks. The crowd erupted with applause as the ceremony concluded, with many in attendance wiping away tears of their own. And yeah, it was just a very emotional moment because we didn't expect that at all. He just turns around and greeted Ken and then handed him the flag. So that was just one of the really, really wonderful moments, and many more that are outlined in the. It was fun because the Iraqi vets were thanking Ken, thank you for all that you did. And he's like, no, thank you guys for what you're doing. So it was a very special time. And another sweet moment was Ken, again, when we were in the ceremony, at one point he tried to take a nap. He gets a little tired in the afternoon, and so we put him under a big tree, then we went around to get some pictures and things, and we came back, and there were 100 and some people just surrounding him, trying to see him and talk with him and thank him, people from all over the world. It was amazing. And then this sweet little boy, he was 3-4 years old, came up and he asked his mom if he could give Ken a kiss. And so he reached up and gave Ken a kiss, so it was very, very sweet. And yeah, he knew. And then again, this is the, I can't describe it, I don't know if you've been, but everywhere you look, there's just crosses in every direction, and it's just heartrending to see all those crosses. I'm just going to read one last excerpt here. I'm getting toward the end, so hang in there. Desiring to see the grave sites up close and to have a moment of quiet reflection, Ken started to wheel himself down the sidewalk leading to the burial grounds. He stopped on a concrete square where the American flag was positioned. Grateful to be alone, he looked out across the lawn. He took note of the striking geometric pattern of the crosses and the vivid contrast of white against green against blue, a combination that elicited a surprising sense of serenity and order in a place that had only known unspeakable terror and chaos. A handful of visitors ambled slowly among the crosses, pausing here and there to read the names of the fallen or to place a flower or flag near a marker. There were no sounds other than the flapping of the flag, the distinctive melody of a song thrush, and the swish of the surf in the distance. Ken bowed his head, prayed, and wept in remembrance of those who lie in silence. As we were in France, there are quite a few memorials, as you can imagine, to General Patton. And the one quote that I saw very frequently engraved on stone was one of his quotes, and he said, let me not mourn for the soldiers who have died, but rather let me be glad that such heroes lived. And for me, Ken was absolutely one of those heroes. Well, we returned to Minnesota soon after that. That was the end of our trip. We went back to Paris and then caught our flight home. And Ken was surprised in 2012 with the French Legion of Honor Medal. This is France's highest honor. Again, it started back in Napoleon's day. And typically it's reserved for French people who have contributed and been heroes, if you will, for French nationals in their country, or people that have been giving outstanding contributions to France. But they do select a few American soldiers, and so he received that. There's a larger picture of it on the table here that you can see. But he was just so honored by that. He also received the Bronze Star for meritorious service in combat. And that was for the breakthrough at Avranches, we believe, and some other service medals as well. And then, so we went down to the state capitol and had this wonderful ceremony. And then about a month later, they had another special Veterans Day thing, and Ken was presented to the Minnesota House of Representatives, and they all stood up and applauded, and they said it was the most applause for any guest ever. So he was just so honored. He was a true patriot, and yeah, he really enjoyed that. So in closing, I just want to say that Ken was a man of courage and compassion, honor, and humility. And if you asked him, if you said, Ken, thank you for your service, he'd just say, you know what, I was just glad I had a part in it. Again, he was very humble, as many of our soldiers are. But the same traits we see in today's everyday soldiers are what we saw in Ken: the courage, compassion, honor, and humility. The men and women who've sacrificed more than we will ever know to defend our life and liberty. We must never forget them or their work on our behalf. I will certainly never forget my best friend and hero, Ken Krueger. How thankful I am that he entrusted a novice writer like me with his story, so the generations to come will know and remember that our military heroes, quote, endured all and gave all, that justice among nations might prevail, and that mankind might enjoy freedom and inherit peace, unquote. And that's a quote that is on one of the, in the chapel at the American Cemetery in Colville. During the war, I told you it was like the coldest winter, and Ken was just freezing at one point. And so he broke into a German warehouse that had been abandoned. Again, the Germans were running back to Germany. And so he came back, and he has some German silverware. It has the little Nazi sign on there. And he was able to get a little sewing kit, and he got some gloves and some bunny fur. And he sewed the bunny fur into the gloves because he was just freezing. He had nothing in the Jeep. I can imagine, no heat or anything, of course, and just open. So he got very cold. And we have his hat and his jacket. And don't ask me what all the things mean. Somebody one time tried to point them out to me. I'm going to research that. I don't know all that. But I just have some artifacts here that were his. There's an Army songbook and just a book about the Signal Corps. And you're welcome to look at these just very gently. I'm trying to keep them in good shape. This is a road map book of mainly England. And so he used these maps in here to be able to find these roads. And oftentimes it was very challenging to do that. And this was really neat too. We found another one of the maps, and this was France, and this is the actual map that he used. And oftentimes they would say, yeah, this company or whatever is over here, and he had to go try to find it. And any other questions? Very good question, yes. The Germans were really nasty, as you can imagine, and one of the things that they did was and some of the Jeeps, they had a special little bar that was go on the front bumper, so they would catch any piano wire, because what the soldiers would do, or the Nazis would take piano wire and string it across the road, and so sometimes it would make the Jeep flip, and so they would get killed that way, or more likely they would put it up at neck level and it would slice the soldiers' heads off. So yeah, it was horrible. So what they had was either he had to flip up. If he didn't have a Jeep with that special kind of a stick to deflect it, they had a special windshield thing. So if he put his windshield up, it could make it would just go past me. So thanks. Come on up. You can look at my display if you like, and I appreciate your coming. Thank you.